Finals week this week. A lot of academic stuff to um, stay on top of and finish up here. I think all of our guys are finished, and that's always an interesting week when you're trying to balance academics, guys finishing with preparation for your next opponent. So obviously Minnesota has played a really challenging schedule, and they play a lot of games away from home. Everyone that's been to their venue knows it's a pretty special place to play, great environment. Been really impressed with them collectively. They're a different team this year, obviously, with the guys they lost, but they're physically really tough. Obviously, Daniel's the sophomore big has been outstanding, has had an outstanding start. But they've got a transfer car that's really playing well for them, shooting on the perimeter, and a physical presence to them that Richard Pitino's teams typically have, a physical presence and a physical toughness to them. That's typically what you see with his guys. You can tell they're coached to play that way. I've got great appreciation and respect for that. So it's going to be a great challenge. Tough-minded, well-coached team, and we need to be ready to go on Sunday night.
How have you approached having 8 days in between games when you're playing really well and you hit a break like that? Do you dial in on some things you haven't been able to address yet? Are you shoring up things that you've noticed through 9 games? What do you try to do when you have a chance to catch a breather like this?
Well, we as a coach, you're looking at things that maybe you feel like you have not addressed properly at the beginning of the week to kind of set the table for your week. So, we looked at some special situation stuff, end of game stuff, just because we've not had a lot of situations where we've had game up to this point to where it's been, last 3 minutes of 1 or a 2 possession game. Mm-hmm. So we've not had great practice with that. So we've tried to do that the last couple days. We tried to give him some. We did a skill workout yesterday instead of practice. So we tried to break up the week a little bit. We gave him some time off early in the week for finals. So you're always worried about their conditioning level. What is it? Obviously, it's a good decision not to play, but when you're playing well, you'd like to keep playing as much as possible.
The success that you've had to this point this season, how much is that a reflection of the fact you have versatile guys? You've been able to try out a lot of different lineups and combinations that teams can't really just scheme for 1 or 2 lineups, that you've been able to mix and match more than you have in the past?
I'm not sure. It's a good question. I don't know how much that would be attributing to. I think it's been beneficial for us, no question. As we talked about last year, our offense was, we all know it was pretty one-dimensional. We didn't get to the foul line enough. We didn't have enough diversity in the ways that we could attack people. So hopefully the increase in some of the diversity in our lineup will affect that. But I don't know if we'll know that, for sure here until, we're a month from now.
Kyle mentioned teams can start to get complacent in December. With the success you guys have had, obviously the guys know you're undefeated. They've seen the rankings. They're on social media. How do you keep their heads to what got them there as opposed to starting to buy into that kind of hype?
I think that's a constant challenge for any coach. The ability to handle success is often harder than being able to deal with adversity. Both present challenges equally, for sure, in different ways. The reality is there's not been a Big Ten win on the road this year. It's 10-0 at home, and I think we had 1 loss at this point last year, and of January where we didn't win a game. So I think, you're trying to focus in on the day in front of us. That's kind of been our mantra for as long as we can remember. I've tried to stay away from diving in. We've certainly talked about the maturity that's required in handling success. And everybody loves the analogy of poison, and I think there's some real truth to that. If you're constantly reading about your own success, there's no question that can affect any mind. But the reality is, we better have a hunger group, especially if you're going to have a chance in the Big Ten on the road.
Obviously, Dwayne's hot shooting has been huge for you guys. When you have a guy like that, I mean, he's put in the starting lineup, he's really started to heat up. Is there anything to, hey, maybe this guy's better starting, and Andre, is a guy who can come in and do some things off the bench, or these matchups work together better? I mean, how do you kind of look at that when a guy's been successful?
Yeah, we've just kind of, since we went that direction before the Villanova game, I think we've just kind of, actually it was a game before the Villanova game, but since we went in that direction, we've just kind of stayed with it and not really put a whole lot of thought into it, because you're really talking about, the first 4 or 5 minutes of the game, which you want to get off to a good start, but it's not the be-all, end-all. It's a 40-minute game. So we really love Andre's versatility to be able to really sub in for either at the perimeter spot or the forward spot, and his leadership with some of the freshmen that we have coming off the bench as well pretty early. I think that's been vital for us. And Dwayne's obviously been in a good rhythm here, starting, playing with confidence offensively. He needs to get better defensively, but he's been good offensively.
That dynamic we talked about there with Andre, you're sort of bringing in your most experienced player with your least experienced players often at times. Just how do you see that, or how have you seen that help the young guys in these moments where you have something with Andre?
Well, even though he's not the most vocal, and that's an understatement probably, but he connects out there on the floor, Andre. So he's got a real ability, I've said this, just to connect, particularly defensively. He's not out of position a whole lot. He understands our scheme really well, sees things, and when you're out there with 2 other freshmen, that's really, really important, because the reality is they don't see things. That's the reality. They don't see things when they need to see it as early as they need to see it, particularly on the defensive end. So I think that's why it's felt right, at least at this point, to keep it like it has been.
And you mentioned earlier your ability to get to the free throw line. I think you're like 40%-ish free throw rate right now. It's obviously really good. What's a number that would make you happy, even if the 40% can't be, you can't hold it for the entire season? Somewhere around there, is that where you'd like to be? And just what have you thought about that ability thus far?
It's an interesting question. It's really been more about, are we getting there more than the opponent attempts? I have to go back and look, Bill, at our previous years, some of our teams that got to the foul line consistently, and see what our season high total was. And see what percentages I'd probably feel most comfortable with. I do think that, and I've not done it, but if we were to look at us through 9 games last year, you would probably see a trend of us not getting there, as I remember talking about it early, us not getting there as much as I would have liked to. So it's been encouraging, and I think DJ and EJ have helped to that end, because those guys, the addition of those guys, along with Caleb, has improved that number.
I wanted to talk to you about the way you guys are scoring right now. A couple of years ago, I know he wasn't the only guy, but Keita Bates-Diop was your Big Ten Player of the Year, and it was like you watched your team. If you needed a bucket, you're going to Keita.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned you haven't been in a lot of, you know, crunch time situations, but you do have plays you draw up after that. We
Yeah.
talk about, you know, some of your assistants calling up plays. Do you look at, 'cause I think you go down to EJ Liddell, and he's averaging 7.5. You can probably envision him maybe leading the team in scoring one of these games
Sure.
later in the season.
Yep.
Do you look at this as an advantage right now with these
The
multitude
balance.
of guys that you can maybe rely on to hit a shot?
Yeah, I do, and I think that the numbers may level out to some degree, but I agree with you on a guy like EJ. I think we could see very possibly in January, February, that he's one of, if not our leading scorer in certain games as he continues to get better. I think that's very possible. And I think we'll continue to see, I think some guys continue to grow in that area, and other guys, maybe their numbers level off a little bit. But certainly in our minds, we have a few guys that we feel like when we're in those late game situations, we want to try to put the ball in their hands. And that's, as a coach, you're always trying to evaluate that as you go through the early part of the season and in practice. Where do you want the ball, and whose hands do you want it in certain situations? Because if it's just one guy, then it's pretty easy for the defense to know where that thing's going.
I think it was in the preseason, talking about shooting, where you said, the three-point shooting's been okay, and I think you mentioned Andre.
Yeah.
And his percentage wasn't even 40%. And I kind of raised my eyebrow, I'm like, that's not too good. But
Yeah.
the way you guys have shot from beyond the arc, I mean, you've got guys over 50%. Caleb, is this beyond your wildest dreams, how you're shooting the three, or is this, you like the balance for taking those shots too?
Yeah, I think we taken pretty good ones. I think again, those numbers will level off. It's not tenable, it's right. It's not realistic to think that it's going to stay that way through a 35, 36, 37 game season. But I think our shots have been pretty good ones. You know, we talk all the time. I said it the other day on the radio show. You know, if your percentages are in the low 30s or in the high 20s, you know, there's really just a couple reasons for it. It's pretty simple. You're either not a very good shooter, and that's the reality. You're just not a very good shooter, so you probably need to shoot less, or you're taking bad shots. You know, that's the other option. Or maybe, you know, you're a good shooter that's just in a little bit of a slump, struggling wise. But that won't stay consistent either. Guys that can shoot it. You know, we typically don't have, we chart shooting all the time, and we typically don't have bad shooters shooting threes. Now, do all of our good shooters take good threes? Not necessarily, and then that's when we have to work with film, because it really only hurts them and their efficiency.
Last season, you're really good at like pinpointing things and like putting things in perspective. And last season, at this point when you guys were having this level of success, you were constantly telling us, calm down, and we'll find out in the Big Ten season. Calm down, we'll find out in the Big Ten season. Well, you're in that same position again, and like, do you still feel that way, where it's like you're kind of tempering the expectations a little bit and waiting until the Big Ten season?
Well, I don't think, you know, I know people would think otherwise. I don't do anything intentionally. I'm not trying, I understand your question for sure, but I'm not up here trying to spin anything. It's really just my sense and what I feel based on kind of what I'm watching. And I think we've played good basketball. I think also we have a lot to improve on, and I also have tremendous appreciation for, we play in the best league in the country. It's the best, deepest league in the country. No question about it. It's been proven again. While I can think that we've played good basketball at times, we've got good players who have really performed well, and you got a guy like Caleb who's been exceptional here, you also understand it, that other teams are in this league are really, really good. You know, Minnesota, for example, has had a couple losses, but it was a one possession game against a very good Butler team on the road late. That's a good team. So I think that's kind of what I see right now. As far as us, I'm always going to look and say, okay, how can I coach better? How can we play better? But I'm also not ready to make any kind of sweeping statements yet 9 games into the season.
In that same vein, and you got asked earlier about having such a long time to prepare. When you get in the position you're in now, where you're number 3 in the country, and you could even move up again this week, but you also have 8 days off. How much harder does it become to temper these expectations when you have such a long time to think about what you've done now? Like, does it make it harder, or is it just a little easier to say, okay, now we got 8 days, we can go back to the drawing board and keep preparing as if we haven't done it?
Yeah, I think you're just focused, my focus is not on, and my objective this week isn't on anything other than trying to figure out how we can improve and get better, and how we can have good practices in the midst of finals and guys that I know that are stressed, and I'm stressed too for them. So in the midst of all that, just, how do we have a good day of practice? Really, that's my focus. I don't really spend one moment thinking about, rankings this early in the season at all. I think you're always mindful of maybe what your players are digesting. So, if we're going to talk about anything in some of the areas, you're aware of what guys are digesting in social media, but I also don't know what all they're digesting. Who knows? Some guys are probably watching cartoons or something, not even sure where we're at. So.
Having a real tight turnaround after this game, do you allow yourself at all, do you put any planning this week for having to turn around and play on a Tuesday after you play on a Sunday on the road?
We're just taking this one as it is right now. It is a quick turnaround. You're exactly right. And win or lose, you gotta have a quick turnaround. We did try to do that a little bit from Carolina to Penn State, but what we ended up, I said to the staff, hey, I wanna prepare that week going into Carolina for some stuff with Penn State, and we did it just a little bit but it's hard to dive too much into that, given you obviously have an opponent right in front of you.
Have you talked about the atmosphere you're going to experience up at the barn? Have you been there often?
Coached there as an assistant one time.
Okay.
Unique venue. Those that know of it know it well. It's Williams Arena, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Really unique venue. Great place to play. Typically a great environment. The raised floor, the whole deal.
And you said trying to watch out what your players are digesting, what people are saying about them. Did you happen to listen to Gary Parrish and what he said about you guys on his most recent podcast?
I did not.
Okay. It's not really suitable for me to say it out loud, but I can say it later. But it was very, very complimentary and flattering of how you guys play, and I just wondered if that was something that had reached your ears or not.
No, like Gary and listen to him. You actually have me curious now, Adam.
It's eye-opening.
You're gonna think it's weird.
It's
Okay. Well. Okay.
It rhymes with lumber done.
Excuse me.
It rhymes with lumber done. That's where you should be ranked.
Well, that's not even what I'm talking about. It's
Okay.
their style of play and what he thinks of it. He's a big fan.
Okay. Well, yeah. No, I have not seen that, but I love guys, and so many of you in here. I genuinely appreciate it because I love people that talk about our sport, and we have many of you here who do a tremendous job, just talking about our sport in a sports town that's crowded. So Gary does a great job kind of promoting our sport as so many of you guys do.
I think Caleb said a couple of different games that you might be able to call like this is his best game, and they've been pretty different on the stat sheet. Does that tell you something about when you get into March and maybe you play a different type of team, he can give you different types of games?
I think that is as much of a sign of a really good player as anything. Like, when you watch a really good player, that's what people see. Man, he was able to impact the game, and these are his numbers, and he was able to impact the game, and these are his numbers. The obvious ones are the Penn State numbers, right? But I've also had people say it's the best they've seen Caleb play, people who know the game, when he had, 14 and 11. I just think that's the sign of a really good player. And it's a credit to him.
Is that different from last year when you sort of knew what he might be able to give you on a game-to-game basis?
Yeah, I think he's impacted in more ways, for sure. I think he's impacted in more ways this year. Rebounding, defensively, he's impacted in more ways. Obviously, also being able to be a threat, continue to be a threat, even more of a threat on the perimeter, where you can play through him at the high post or outside the three-point line as well as the low post. I just think, but it kind of has begun right now, I think, with his rebounding and his defense.
It is still so early for him, but a month and a half in, when he has that big body change, I just wondered physically, where is he at compared to at the beginning of the years? I know that was an issue for him the past 2 years, just maintaining where he was at the beginning of the year. Do you see him on a better trajectory in the past 2 years?
I do, but it's January and February will be the tell. And we're not gonna be on him if he had some weight there. I mean, but he's gotta monitor it, we gotta monitor it, he's gotta stay committed to it. Really, Caleb's the one that deserves the credit for this, because he's the one that's had the personal discipline, and that's gonna have to continue through several months. And it's hard when we talked about it, you practice less, a little bit less come January, so there's less conditioning part of it. So he has to do some of that on his own, in addition, as he does after games right now. That personal discipline just has to continue. We'll maybe do some things in addition, but it's gonna have to be like a daily thing with him, when he feels like he's not done enough, not burnt enough calories. He's gonna have to continue to do it with Coach Q and with his brother.
Chris, when you go from 8 days without playing to, I think it's 3 games in 6 days now, I imagine maybe conditioning would be front of mind in terms of things we'd be concerned about.
Yeah.
How much do you spend time on that in the 8 days that you're off? Do you give any more time to conditioning maybe you would to just basketball work?
Well, it's part of the reason why we initially were going to go Monday and Thursday off this week, and when we practiced on Tuesday, I thought our conditioning was really poor. So we decided to add Thursday skill workout, just because I was concerned about that. So it is something I'm very mindful of right now, leading into Sunday, because when you have some time off like we did, we played at noon, we didn't do much on Sunday, nothing on Monday. You are concerned about that, making sure our fitness level is where it needs to be.
Is it easier to maintain that when you are playing? I don't know.
Yes.
But you're playing in succession like that?
Yes.
Because you're kind of used to it?
Yep,
Okay.
it is. I think you worry about the gaps like this, especially when you have some time off from practice. We had a couple guys that have been banged up who already struggle with their conditioning, so they've been out even more this week. So as a coach, we're gonna have to make sure we are on top of him getting ready to go for Sunday.
Chris, I know we asked you about him when you brought him in, but sort of just touching base on this again, Jake Diebler's impact on the coaching staff, where do you see him touching these players and making an impact on this team?
He does a great job with relationships with our guys. He's really intentional about that. I think, as I mentioned, Ryan and Terry both do a great job with that. But he's done a great job with his position group, which is, primarily the point guards and the combo guards. And I think he's really brought that. He's brought a kind of an enthusiasm that he had as a player, a competitiveness he had as a player. I think it's been good for him to kind of grow as a coach and learn. I'm reminded often that he's definitely the young one on staff. I forget that 5, 6, 7, 8 years younger than our other guys. But he's brought a lot of great stuff, and obviously including recruiting.
And he speaks Generation Z.
Yes, he does. Yeah, you can tell it. He's got a different style and fashion sense than me, which is not saying much, that's for sure. But the shoe game, the gear game, all the stuff, he can rattle all that off, and I don't know what he's talking about. So.
Not a very serious question to wind this up, but you did have some time off yourself. Did you get all your Christmas shopping done?
No, I have a general rule. I think I said this last year that I don't, outside of maybe something online for my wife, but I don't do any Christmas shopping until our game is completed before Christmas. So I will be out and about. Will it be the 22nd? I'll be out and about in fine local Columbus establishments on the 22nd.
Chris, you said you don't care about the rankings much, especially this early in the season.
Not at all.
But looking back to when you were being brought in for the Ohio State job, was this like the expectation? Did it have to be this way? Did you have to be among, what kind of pressure was that coming into a program like this to get us back there?
Well, listen, I can appreciate the fact that our 3 years here, we've at some point spent time in polls. And a lot of that's been more kind of January, February after you played a certain number of games, which I think adds more value. So I don't want to discount that. I think anytime that you have that, that's good for your program. That's good for recruiting. That's healthy. But I just, I think for me, it's pretty far down the list. If you said, hey, why did you come here? Why were you brought here? I think it's probably one of a number of things that you want your program to be relevant. That's a part of that. I look at some of the programs that I have respect for that maybe couldn't say they've had a 3-year run where they've been ranked, but it's pretty far down the list. We want to be playing better and better as the season goes on. We want to be playing in March. We want to be preparing ourselves to advance in March. Those are the things that we really want to do as a program. We want to develop young men and develop pros. There's a long list of things that would be ahead of that.